You had friends who were building safe spaces for nuclear fallout in their backyards. They were stockpiling rations. They were stockpiling water. Y2K is the first end-of-the-world prophecy in history where something will definitely happen on the predicted date, and you don't have to have religion to believe. Up to maybe 60 to 70% of the population died, which is massive. It's absolutely bonkers. The Soviet colonel who famously saved the world from nuclear war has passed away. Hollywood movies about the end of the world are not just fiction. Humanity has almost been wiped out several times, but most people have no idea about this. In this video, we will discuss the terrifying events that almost caused human extinction, from deadly plagues to failed weapons. We will look back at the frightening moments that nearly erased us from the world. But before we start, if you are new to our channel, please subscribe so you are always updated with videos like this. The day the world almost exploded. In 1961, the world almost ended because of a secret military operation that failed. That operation was meant to protect people, but when it encountered problems, it almost became the very cause of the disaster it was trying to prevent. In the middle of the 20th century, the two most powerful countries were preparing for a war that could end life on the planet. This is how it all happened. In the 1950s, the tension between the two world superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, was growing even more intense. Both sides were afraid that the other might strike first. To intimidate each other, they built extremely powerful nuclear weapons. But instead of bringing peace, this only made the fear and paranoia even worse. American leaders were worried that a sudden attack could happen at any time. They wanted to have a way to retaliate immediately in case war broke out. So the military came up with a way to stay ready at all times. But that plan was dangerous. They decided to put nuclear bombs on airplanes and keep them flying 24 hours a day. There were about a dozen B-52 bombers always in the skies over America, ready to strike the Soviet Union at any moment. When the war starts, the bombers are already in the air. They just have to wait for the order to attack. They can even refuel while in the air to keep flying longer. But that strategy carries a huge risk. If one of the planes crashes, the nuclear bombs it carries will also fall, and that would be a huge disaster. In 1961, that nightmare scenario became a reality. On January 24 of that year, a plane took off from the Air Force Base in North Carolina. It was carrying 2 nuclear bombs. Each one had an explosive power equivalent to 3.8 million tons of dynamite. The flight started smoothly, but later, the crew noticed a serious problem. They had a massive fuel leak. They lost 19 tons of fuel in just 2 minutes. The plane obviously had a serious malfunction. Fuel was pouring out of the plane. If it ran out of fuel, the plane would fall from the sky, and because it was carrying 2 nuclear bombs, its crash would be a huge tragedy. The plane was ordered to return to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base for an emergency landing. But when it descended to around 10,000 feet, the pilots could no longer properly control the plane. The pilot accelerated the plane as much as he could, but it still wasn't enough. They ran out of fuel before reaching the base. The crew tried to eject. 5 survived, but 2 didn't make it. As the plane was falling, it started to break apart while still in the air. Because of that, the 2 nuclear bombs also separated from the aircraft. The bad news is there were 2 nuclear bombs on board that plane, and they were really released from the bomb bay as if it was an actual attack. Fortunately, both bombs had parachutes attached. One of the bombs slowly fell and got caught in a tree in North Carolina. A bomb with more power than all the bombs ever used in the world was hanging from the branches of the trees. The bomb squad arrived immediately and made sure the weapon was safe. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But there was still one more bomb missing. The second bomb wasn't as lucky. Its parachute didn't open. It crashed to the ground at full speed. By some unexplainable miracle, it didn't explode. That happened because the intense impact damaged important parts inside the bomb, so it wasn't able to detonate. But that didn't mean everyone was safe. The bomb was buried deep in the ground and got stuck underground. The military hurried to try to dig it up. They started digging with shovels, but they quickly realized that it was buried too deep. Simply digging with shovels wasn't enough. So more crews arrived along with heavy equipment. They kept digging until they finally reached the bomb. The very first thing they wanted to know was whether it was still armed. A soldier shouted from the bottom of the pit and said, "Lieutenant, I can see the arm safe switch." The officer replied, "Good." But the soldier said, "It's not good, sir, it's armed." When the nuclear bomb fell, its detonation sequence had already started. Almost everything needed for the explosion was already activated except for one switch. If that switch had been flipped, there would have been a nuclear explosion right in North Carolina. Eventually, the military recovered most of the weapon, but some parts of the bomb containing uranium were left underground. They're already too deep to be safely removed. To prevent anyone from digging there someday, the government bought that piece of land. It was a tragedy that almost happened. If either of the two bombs had exploded, millions of lives could have been lost. Worse, America might have thought it was an enemy attack. The US could have retaliated immediately by launching their own nuclear weapons against the perceived enemy, and the other side would surely retaliate as well. That next reaction could have started a global nuclear war that might cause a catastrophe that would destroy the entire world. But life went on, and most people had no idea how close we came to the total extinction of humanity. The illness that wiped out a continent. You've heard of various deadly diseases, but the bubonic plague is on another level. Eventually, it was called the Black Death, because once you were infected, there was almost no hope of survival. The outbreak was so severe that many believed the end of the world had come. To understand how a single infection almost destroyed humanity, we need to go back to its origin. In 1300, ships were the main means of travel and trade. When a ship arrived at the port, it usually brought good news. But in October 1347, 12 merchant ships arrived in Sicily, and what they brought was death. When inspectors boarded the ships, they found corpses inside. The few remaining sailors who were still alive could barely move because of the illness that had struck them from another part of the world, and now they had brought it to Italy. That disease had many names, but most people called it the bubonic plague. The authorities tried to stop its spread by isolating the sick sailors, but they were not the real problem. The ships were full of rats, and these rats carried infected fleas. The bubonic plague spreads through infected fleas that live on the backs of rats. The rats ride on the ships and closely interact with people. The rats came out of the ship and entered the city. From there, the disease spread quickly. Some were infected by flea bites, while others got sick through direct contact with infected people. Once it enters the human body, it can be transmitted to others. This is not an ordinary disease. Approximately 60% of those infected die. This means that out of every 10 people who get sick, only 4 survive. It is estimated that 60 to 70% of the population died. This is an incredibly large number that is almost unbelievable. Doctors quickly searched for a cure, but they did not fully understand the disease. For most of human history, people did not know about germs or microbes as the cause of disease. However, people did not give up. They tried everything to survive. For example, many believed that the plague was a punishment from God. So they tried to ask for forgiveness. There were groups who would whip or punish themselves in public while marching from town to town, believing that self-punishment would bring mercy and salvation. In the end, it was too much. So many people joined those rituals that the Pope was forced to put a stop to them. There was another story that spread during that time. This was about 4 thieves who stole from the houses of the sick. Somehow, they were able to get close to the infected without catching the disease. According to them, they protected themselves by drinking vinegar mixed with herbs. They also rubbed it on their skin. Eventually, the thieves were caught, and according to the legend, they traded the recipe in exchange for mercy. That mixture became known as 4 Thieves vinegar. It even reached a point where people believed that money also carried disease. So they washed their money with vinegar. But none of these remedies worked. The plague continued to spread. It spread throughout Italy and quickly spread along trade routes throughout the Mediterranean and Europe. Entire towns were wiped out. Thousands of farmers died. Because there was no one left to work in the fields, the crops were no longer harvested. Food ran out, so even those who survived the plague died of hunger. The plague returned repeatedly for many years. From hundreds, the number of graves recorded grew to thousands and then millions. Doctors continued to try to find a cure, but they also had to protect themselves while treating patients. So in the following outbreaks, they wore long robes and bird-like masks. They even put herbs inside the masks so they wouldn't inhale the disease. Over time, the doctors noticed something important. Isolating those who were sick slowed down the spread of the plague. Quarantine became the most effective way to stop the disease from spreading. Italian authorities ordered all plague victims removed from the city and sent to the countryside to die or suffer alone. And when they did that, the plague gradually subsided. When it was over, it was as if Europe had been emptied of people. According to the BBC, it is estimated that about 25 million people, more than one-third of Europe's population, died because of the plague. It took several centuries before doctors fully understood what really caused it. In 1894, scientists discovered the bacteria that causes the plague. That discovery changed the world. It helped in the rise of modern medicine and public health. Why was the Black Death so deadly? It's simple, there were no antibiotics back then. The plague showed how ruthless it was. If it had continued for a few more years at the same pace, humanity might not have survived. The countdown to Doomsday, December 31, 1999, was not just an ordinary New Year's Eve. For many, this was the day modern civilization would collapse. Elevators might stop working. There would be no power or heat. Credit cards and ATMs might not work. People started to panic. But at the same time, they also prepared. Families stocked up on canned food. Some people hid in underground shelters. Others even bought weapons for protection. This was one of the most nerve-wracking nights in modern history. And all of this was because of a computer glitch called the Y2K bug. In 1970, computers were very different from what we have today. They were big, slow, and extremely expensive. One of the biggest costs was storage. To save money, programmers decided to use only the last 2 digits of the year in the data. They did this because systems back then lacked memory space. And they also didn't expect their software to last that long. That's why the year 1975 was stored as 75. 1989 became 89. For many decades, there was no problem with this, and society became even more dependent on computers. Computers are used in hospitals to monitor patients. Power plants rely on them to generate electricity. Airplanes depend on software to fly. Even nuclear weapons have millions of lines of computer code. In short, the world is run by computers. By the early 1990s, someone asked a disturbing question. Why use 4 digits when 2 are enough? And that's when they realized a big problem. What will happen to computers when the year 2000 comes? The answer is surprising. Computers will record the year 2000 as 00. But for the computer, 00 could mean the year 1900. This means that the time will go back 100 years. And that sudden jump could cause a widespread glitch and simultaneous crash of millions of systems, which could result in catastrophic damage. But most people have no idea that this problem exists. In 1993, a software expert published an article warning about the glitch. When the public read about it, panic started and the media amplified the fear even more. Now the government is comparing Y2K to major natural disasters like earthquakes, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Hollywood also released movies about worst-case scenarios. There's Y2K, the movie, and even a documentary called Y2K Family Survival Guide. People believed the end was near, so they prepared in different ways. Some prepared for protection. Others stored enough food to last a year. There were religious groups who prayed for God's mercy. There were also businessmen who profited from people's fear and sold Y2K survival kits. While the world was panicking, the programmers were working to fix the problem. They had to find and rewrite every two-digit year in the system, and everything had to be finished before midnight on December 31, 1999. A race against time. December 31, 1999. Governments around the world were on high alert. Families waited at home with their loved ones, anticipating what would happen. But when midnight came and January 2000 arrived and the end of the world didn't happen, instead, everything turned out fine. But it wasn't just luck. For 2 years before Y2K, IT professionals worked an average of 70 hours a week to fix the code. It is estimated that $300 to $600 billion were spent to prevent possible problems. And all that effort paid off. Airplanes kept flying, banks stayed open, hospitals continued to operate. And the Y2K bug did not destroy the world. The war that almost ended civilization. World War is exactly what its name means. A war in which almost every part of the world is involved in the fighting. In history, this has only happened twice. And both times, the damage was enormous. Engineers made new weapons. Scientists created deadly poisons. Spies were sent behind enemy lines. As the number of casualties continued to rise, it seemed like humanity was slowly destroying itself. During the First World War, more than 15 million lives were lost. This became known as total war, a war in which the entire nation was directly involved. Millions of men fought on land, at sea, and in the air. But it was the Second World War that almost completely destroyed civilization. By the end of it, it is estimated that 3% of the world's population was lost. But it could have been much worse. It started when Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. He wanted to dominate the world and declared that the Germans were a superior race that needed living space. He quickly rebuilt Germany's military and they began to invade neighboring countries. Other countries tried to stop this and eventually it became a world war. Millions of innocent people were taken to prison camps. Food became scarce. Civilians lived in constant fear every day. As the war dragged on, many people believed that the only way to end it was to remove the man at the center of it all, Adolf Hitler. That's why many plans from different parts of the world were made to kill him, but he repeatedly survived. One such instance happened in Munich. A man placed a bomb near the stage where Hitler was supposed to speak, but Hitler left a few minutes earlier. So when the bomb exploded, he was no longer there. In another incident, even his own officials tried to kill him. The most serious attempt was in July 1944. A German officer brought a briefcase to a meeting with Hitler, and inside it was a bomb. He placed it near Hitler and left. A few minutes later, the device exploded. Many were killed, but Hitler survived once again. A heavy oak table saved him from the direct blast. After the incident, he became even more paranoid. He ordered a massive wave of arrests, and an estimated 5,000 people suspected of being involved in plots against him were detained. In total, there were no less than 42 attempts to kill him using poison, snipers, and bombs. But all of them failed. Eventually, Hitler convinced himself that he was protected by fate. Because of that overconfidence, he became careless and made huge mistakes. In 1945, Germany was defeated. But in the Pacific, the war was still ongoing. And that's where the most devastating strike of the entire conflict happened. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. A witness described the explosion as a scene from hell. The flash radiation and heat from the explosion burned hills even up to 8,000 feet away from ground zero. Fortunately, the war ended before more nuclear weapons could be used. Because experts warned that nuclear war could lead to the complete extinction of human civilization. The Second World War lasted for 6 years. By the end of it, the whole world was devastated. An estimated 60 million lives were lost. Nothing has come close to this level of destruction since then. The next chapter discusses a devastating natural disaster that you probably haven't heard of. The year when the sun disappeared. The year the sun disappeared. Volcanoes erupt frequently, and most people don't pay much attention to it anymore. But in 1815, there was an eruption so powerful that it almost brought about the end of the world. It didn't just destroy the land, it also darkened the sky. The sun disappeared, crops failed, and the world began to freeze. For a whole year, many believed that the end had come. The story began on the island of Sumbawa in present-day Indonesia. The people there were mostly farmers and peasants. Their way of life depended on sunlight, rain, and harvests. In the middle of the island stood Mount Tambora. For many generations, it was quiet. Before it erupted, most people didn't know that it was actually a volcano. That's why people became complacent and even built villages around it. Children grew up playing on the slopes of the mountain, but underground pressure continued to build up. By 1815, Tambora could no longer contain it. It erupted. Hot lava spewed out, and the eruption caused earthquakes, tsunamis, and pyroclastic flows that destroyed land and claimed thousands of lives in Indonesia. Witnesses described the eruption as a flowing mass of blazing fire. Thousands of lives were lost and many villages were destroyed. But this was not the most severe effect. The greater danger was invisible to the eye. The eruption of Tambora poisoned the sky. It released an enormous amount of ash and tens of millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The ash and gas rose so high that they couldn't be washed away by rain. They reached the stratosphere and began to reflect sunlight, causing the world to cool. As the particles spread, less sunlight reached the surface of the Earth. This means less heat, and the planet gradually became colder. At first, people only noticed the colder weather. But after a few months, it became clear that there was a big problem. The weather was no longer normal. The year 1816 became known as the year without a summer, because even in the middle of the year, there was snow in the month of June. A frost that destroyed crops hit in July. By August, the fields had frozen and there really was no summer that year. Europe, China, and even North America experienced lower than normal temperatures, and entire harvests of crops were destroyed. Food shortages spread throughout the world. People went hungry. In some places, there were even riots. In Asia, heavy rains caused flooding, and in India, new diseases began to spread. It was complete chaos, all because of a single volcanic eruption. Fortunately, it didn't last forever. Over time, the ash and sulfur gradually settled back to the ground. The sun shone again and the temperature slowly warmed up. By 1818, the seasons had returned to normal. Crops grew again and there was food once more. Despite the severe trials, humanity survived.